It's time for a US versus China trade war update. So first, let me talk about some of the Chinese economic data that has been coming out the last couple weeks. The US and China trade, according to Chinese official statistics, is down 9% in the first half of 2019. So that's down substantially because of the tit for tat, the tariff war, and other things that have the retaliatory tariffs and the other punitive steps that both countries have done so far in this trade war, whether it's China threatening to not buy any more soybeans, and I believe they still have not bought soybeans, and then Trump bailing out soybean farmers. I think the number right now is $20 billion. Let me talk about some more Chinese economic data. So the producers, Chinese manufacturing data, that data shows, and that's compiled by the Chinese government, it shows that the Chinese manufacturers have too much inventory and they've been discounting because I believe prices have not risen. So there was an official response to that. Let me pull up this South China Morning Post article I have on this. It's from Kristen Huang from July 10th, and it says China will not turn to global financial crisis stimulus playbook to offset U.S. trade war, says Beijing advisor. So Liu Shangxi, the head of the Chinese Academy of Fiscal Sciences, says Beijing will rely on tax reductions and budget management reform. And the $580 billion worth of stimulus package that was used in 2008 after Lehman Brothers bankruptcy will not help China's weakening economy, he says. And I think you can read more of the article. I'll attach a link to it in the information section after this live stream show is over. But I think after you read the article, you're going to come to the conclusion that the people in power in Beijing and the people at the People's Bank of China, not only are they worried about their manufacturers who have too much inventory and they're discounting the inventory, but on top of that, there's also a lot of inflationary pressures with the monetary inflation and credit in the Chinese economy, and that's resulting in problems with food prices. So there's potential worsening shortages for food and higher food prices, also higher rent prices. So also, I got from one of my China sources, he sent me a bunch of new information, some information and also good analysis of his views of how the U.S. versus China trade war has changed, which side has an advantage now before the G20 meeting and after the G20 meeting. So let me read you what I was sent with the information, and then I'll talk about it afterwards. Okay, so Trump and China were playing a game of chess, according to my source, and Trump had a winning position before the G20 meeting. It was prodding the three Chinese weaknesses: food security, energy security, and financial security. China was at a huge disadvantage, and just pressing those three things, China may have folded and given in to the US's and Trump's demands a lot easier. Perhaps it would have happened already. And then my source continues, but then Trump let his ego get the best of him, in his opinion, in my source's opinion. Trump boasted about ordering Xi to meet him at the G20. Behind the scenes, Xi said no. And Xi did not agree to any meeting at the G20 without already agreed upon concessions. And Huawei, the restrictions on Huawei had to be removed in order for Trump to meet Xi, and no new tariffs. So Trump, according to my source, folded, to use either a poker analogy. He's mixing chess and poker analogies, but it's fine. I like them both. Trump folded and gave away all of his leverage to have tea with a North Korean dictator. Remember, there was also the photo op, too, of Trump being like the first president to cross the demilitarized zone from South Korea into North Korea. And I think Trump is one of Trump's major mentors was President Richard Nixon. And remember, Nixon went to China. Nixon negotiated that trade deal. So I think Trump was doing the optics of, I accomplished something by meeting with Kim Jong-un and crossing the border, the DMZ, into North Korea that no other American president has done. So that was more of a Trump ego boost, probably, than really accomplishing anything meaningful. Because what it sounds like is that North Korea takes a lot of orders from China. So basically, China set up the meeting, and China set up the meeting with North Korea there, and Trump had to agree on terms and take the sanctions and the other issues that the U.S. had with Huawei off the table. So my source continues, it was seen as a big victory in China. Trump folded. China gave nothing but permission to have tea with North Korea and the photo op with Kim Jong-un. My source says China will not buy a single American soybean until all tariffs are lifted. So China's really trying to press the advantage here. China senses that they have more leverage, and China is really pressing that. Not only is China threatening to not buy any more soybeans, and I have an article on this, you can read it after this live stream's over. Also recently, and China Uncensored just covered this on a video, and I'll attach a link to the video at the end of to that video. They do a news wrap-up each week, and they're talking about how China just ordered the U.S. and the military-industrial complex and the U.S. government to not sell Taiwan $2.2 billion worth of guns and military equipment. So China thinks they have big leverage here in the trade war now, and they are attempting to press that by pressing American farmers, going after American farmers that they won't buy soybeans, and going after the military-industrial complex that their $2.2 billion deal to Taiwan to sell arms to, that the U.S. has to drop that. And every Chinese person, okay, back to what my source wrote, and every Chinese person knows that China's going to have to deal with pain then if they're not going to buy American soybeans right away. So going forward, if Trump wants any deal whatsoever, it's going to have to be on China's terms. So China is going to be very aggressive about trying to press the leverage here. However, this could backfire. Okay, so my source thinks that this chess game for now is lost and that China won it. But so Trump either gives in or knocks all the pieces off the board and starts over with some massive new tariffs in the next couple months. And from an educated guess and probability standpoint, I think that's very likely. Trump, according to some of the polls out there, he has like a 52% re-election probability. So I think that's the highest one I've seen so far. So he's a 52% re-election probability. And that's really, if he doesn't think he can get reelected or he's worried about not getting reelected, the tariffs could be something that would really hurt his chances of being reelected, because more everyday Americans, working class and middle class Americans, especially in those key swing states that had not voted Republican in many decades since Ronald Reagan, those states could flip if Trump plays this wrong. So Trump is up for reelection. Time is short and time will tell. My source's prediction is another U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement type of deal, which is what happened after NAFTA, the USMCA trade agreement that happened in the last 8 months. So a deal about nothing, a photo op and moving some chairs around to make it appear like major progress was made. Remember how Trump has touted now the remade trade deals and said how much better they are, but in actuality, there's not a lot of differences in a lot of the trade deals that Trump has done. There's very little differences, I believe, between NAFTA and some of these other deals. In fact, there's some really weird stipulations in the new trade deals that Trump has done with Mexico and also with Canada. And Trump has been using these tariffs as basically leverage. So he puts a tariff on a country that we have a trade deal with that he doesn't like, or he threatens to, and then he tries to use that for negotiating leverage. So my source says no fundamental changes whatsoever. If that type of trade agreement is agreed upon, then China keeps going on stealing technology and absolutely nothing changes, but Trump would pretend it's a win. So he would be spinning this like greatest economy ever. I got all this great trade deal, saying how it is. And the reality of this situation is, many on Main Street know, is that this is not the greatest economy ever. There's tons and tons of articles. I just saw another article yesterday about how truck drivers, things are getting much, much worse for truck drivers. Bankruptcy, can't pay their bills. They're losing jobs like crazy. And then also I maybe should do a separate show on this, like the sugar daddy index. That thing is spiking like crazy now. The sugar daddy index. There was a Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge has been covering a lot of those articles now for years, but it seems there's more and more of them. And a lot of college newspapers now are starting to interview these women anonymously who are doing sugar daddies. This one University of North Carolina Chapel Hill student was making $12,000 per month with like 3 or 4 different older male boyfriends. Okay, I went a little off tangent, but whatever, this is my show. So China is now calling the shots, according to my source. It's creeping in on the US dollar dominance. It will be interesting to see if the US just sits back and lets it happen. I don't think it's in Trump's ego. It's in Trump's... I don't think it's in his nature to be patient and cautious. I think he'd rather make a mess and then do something else, be a man of action, and then try to clean it up. That's my view on Trump for how he acts. So even if he makes a mistake, he would rather be aggressive trying to make a mistake. So it's all out in the open now that China will dictate the terms of trade, not Trump or the US. And my source doesn't know what Trump was thinking when he agreed to concessions before the G20 meeting with Xi. It was a huge mistake that can't be undone now. Get ready for another US-MCA type of deal. The alternative is Trump does a huge flip-flop on trade deal, puts more tariffs on, and completely crashes the stock market. And we get one of those Democratic Socialist candidates if the real economy gets much, much worse than it already is and the stock market crashes as the next president in 2020. That's what my source thinks. My source also says that it is unlikely, but with Trump in charge, if Trump does crash the stock market, it's possible Trump could let the stock market go down temporarily to put the tariffs on, the stock market falls. Trump is okay with that because, and I'm adding this part here, my analysis would be Trump would be okay with putting the tariffs on because it could potentially force the Fed into accelerating their timeline now for the rate cuts. There's a lot of people who think that the 2 rate cuts that the Fed was supposed to do in July at the end of this month are now either delayed or put off. So either we're not going to see the rate cuts for a couple more months or they're off the table altogether. Or QE faster than anticipated if asset prices start to correct or crash. And China has... My source brought this up, and China has so much external dollar-denominated debt, and London, according to my sources, acting as a center now, promoting yuan-denominated debt as a lifeline to keep things going for a while, and that's with the financial powers in London and the banks in London. They're hedging their bets. So they have big interest in the U.S. and the U.S. dollar and the euro dollar and all that stuff, but they're also now hedging with China. But there was an interesting Wall Street Journal article that came out too in the last 4 or 5 days. I'll pull it up here. It's behind a paywall, but I'll give you guys a little trick here. If you look at it on your mobile phone, the article is called Heavy Debt Humbles China's Business Champions, Including the Jewelry Queen. This is from July 8th, 2019, James T. Arity. And he's been living in China, writing for the Wall Street Journal. And if you look at the article on your smartphone, I was able to read it. So I didn't have to be logged. I didn't have to pay for the Wall Street Journal. I was able to read it there for free. And basically, it sounds like a lot of the richest people in China are being hurt really, really bad financially because they borrowed too much debt. And these are billionaires. These are Chinese billionaires, including one of the richest women in China. And she owns this jewelry store. It's a weird type of jewelry. Let me look it up. It's costume jewelry called Neo Glory Holdings Company, Holdings Group, Neo Glory Holdings Group, and her name is Zhao Xiangguang, if I pronounce that correctly, and she built up this empire of costume jewelry at small, cheaper trinkets, and then she sells higher end stuff too. But over the last 7 to 10 years, she's been buying real estate, and also she doesn't have a core competency. She's a jewelry company. And she got into the real estate business of building out shopping malls and building buildings and getting really heavily into real estate. And this is where that great book that I was recommending to you guys, China's Great Wall of Debt, comes in. Because this is exactly the same one of the story. It wasn't mentioned specifically in China's Great Wall of Debt, but it's very similar to other stories in that book. Is that you have these smart Chinese entrepreneurs and they built a successful business in one type of industry, and over the last 5 to 7 years, they stopped making much money in those other industries and they went all in. They took their collateral and assets in their other businesses and they borrowed heavily against them with debt, sometimes even dollar-denominated debt, not just RMB debt. And they went all into construction and real estate, into businesses that they don't know. So this Wall Street Journal article basically just tells a couple more stories and shows how the amount of debt issuances by private Chinese companies has exploded. And according to the Bank of International Settlements, it was, I think, $26 trillion, but the total Chinese, for a private sector Chinese company, total debt outstanding. But the total Chinese credit bubble is approaching $50 trillion and around 300% debt to GDP. It might even be worse if we actually knew what the real economic data is, because China tends to lie really, really bad about a lot of their data. So they say what happens is in Beijing, if they say that they want 6% GDP, then the economists there come up with new formulas and tweak things to make sure that GDP comes out at 6%. So it's not focusing as much on accuracy. Not that the US or any of these other governments are honest, but if you talk to a lot of financial professionals from Asia, they tend to think that the Chinese lie more than a lot of other countries on their economic data. A lot more. So I have some, that's it for what my source said about the latest updates on the trade deal. I have a few more other articles that I'll attach in the information section about China should promote yuan's globalization through cooperation, not conflict with the US dollar. That's a report by Frank Tang from the South China Morning Post from July 6th. And I also, and this is another interesting thing about the trade war that no one has really, I haven't heard it anywhere else. The U.S. News and World Report, their money section, this is an exclusive story. It came out today that the Pentagon, so the Air Force, just released a report, and they are desperate to find miners in North America that can produce rare earths and also find the supply chain. So Pentagon races to track U.S. rare earths output amid China trade dispute. So I'm guessing that the military, the Air Force and other branches of the military here in the U.S. are well aware that the trade war is going to continue to get worse before it gets better, and they are really starting to panic now about rare earth supply, because China could, and this is China could gain even more of an advantage if they do this on rare earths, but it could also backfire too. But they could restrict the supply completely, and that would hurt companies like Apple, a lot of defense companies, because there's a lot of rare earths in a lot of military technology like missile guidance systems and lasers. And then there's a ton of rare earths in smartphones and other miniaturized electronics that use the neodymium iron boron magnet or rare earth permanent magnet technology. So if you want to read the U.S. News and World Report article, I'll also put it. It's by Ernest Shader. Okay, I think I pronounced it right there. It's in the, I'll put it in the information section. It came out today. So it sounds like the U.S. military is really starting to panic that the trade war is going to get worse and that the rare earths hammer is going to come down on them. And this has been, everyone's been realizing this for the last 6 or 7 years, but no one really cared. I was covering this as a rare earths analyst, in 2010 and 2011, and I was worried about it back then, but it seems that really no one else cared. Remember Japan, this happened briefly to Japan for about 1.5 years, 2 years. Japan was almost entirely cut off from rare earths, and they had to buy a lot of it on the black market. They had to buy some of it from Mountain Pass. Japan doesn't have any of its own rare earth supply. They did find a lot of rare earths at the bottom of the ocean, but it's around Japan, but it's nowhere near economic. It's way too expensive to pull it out right now. And it's also to mine rare earths and separate them and go through the value chain of turning like rare earth, the powders into rare earth oxides, the concentrates, rare earth concentrates into rare earth oxides, and then throughout the value chain, it is very toxic and very expensive, and it requires a technical know-how that a lot of people in a lot of countries do not have. So the trade war is very interesting, and it sounds to me like it's a very fluid situation, and it definitely does sound like Trump let his ego get the best of him. I mean, that happens a lot with Trump, but in this particular case, it sounds like the American farmers are going to be collateral damage. Although Trump has promised, remember, $20 billion in bailouts, but we'll see exactly how much Trump gives them. So let me count the number. Oh, I have one more story I wanted to talk about. So this guy, Tony Nash, he's on Twitter. You can follow him. Oh man, where did it just go? Okay, 1 second. I have to pull Twitter back up. My phone's acting up. Okay, this guy, Tony Nash, he's the founder of an artificial intelligence trading firm called Complete Intelligence. And he also wrote at The Economist and other market research. He's lived in Asia for over a decade in Singapore, and he studies global markets and economics. And he tweeted out this article from the South China Morning Post a few days ago. I got to pull it up. It's going to take a couple seconds to scroll. It was up, and then my phone acted up. I don't know what the hell happened. Okay, almost there. Here we go. So this is from a South China Morning Post article, and he said in 2015 and 2016 he thought the Belt and Road purpose was investment and soft power purposes, and he admits now that he was terribly wrong. And hidden in this South China Morning Post article that came out recently is that a retired People's Liberation Army, which is China's military colonel Yue Gang, on Chinese military participating in an exercise in Europe. Here's a quote from the retired People's Liberation Army colonel in the article. Quote, "The People's Liberation Army in the future will need to go abroad to protect China's interests, overseas interests in countries along the Belt and Road Initiative," end quote. So this is not going to be a situation where China's doing all these friendly trade deals with Venezuela or all these friendly trade deals with Africa where it's win-win for the Venezuelan government, win-win for Africa. The only win-win here is it's heads we win, tails you lose for China. So basically, China either gets a ton of natural resources on a very long-term contract for below market prices for giving you cash. They get you in debt like crazy, or they get like a port. So either they get copper, oil, farmland, something, or a port, something China desperately needs, and then it looks like it's going to be gunboat diplomacy or jingoism, which is no better than what the U.S. has done. So the people in the alternative media, the people in the gold community who are China lovers, saying that China is so much better than the U.S., it appears that China is going to copy and do exactly what the U.S. and the European governments did with versions of colonialism or, resource. Trying to think of the right phrase here. Just taking advantage of a tiny little country, getting them into debt like crazy, and then if they don't pay, they either take the natural resources, take the port, or the Chinese military shows up, and, it's time for a regime change. So if you want to read that article, I believe that quote is buried in the article later in the article. It's not the headline because it's a Chinese paper. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 very interesting Chinese articles. Oh, 6, counting the one I just told you the headlines about. So there's 6 for this trade war update. Plus I told you some of the summary of stuff of what one of my sources in China told me. And this is an update in the chess match that we have between China and the U.S. for the trade war. Comment below what you think is going to happen, but it looks like Trump has made some mistakes, and that in order for my educated guess, and I'm not in favor of this, I'm a free market person, but there is no free trade. There is no real free trade. All these countries cheat. So it looks like my educated guess would be that Trump will be aggressive with increasing tariffs again over the next couple months because he screwed things up recently before, during, and after the G20 meeting with China. Okay, well, I'm going to take a look at the listener questions and comments section before I let you guys go. I've been working hard. I put out content, I think, every single day this week. Some days I put out 2. Hopefully you've had a chance to listen to my Ron Paul interview. I released it already. And let me know. Send me an email if you're thinking of coming to the Ron Paul Institute conference. If enough people, maybe we'll have like a listener dinner or something like that. Maybe we'll meet around the conference area. There's some good restaurants like 15, 20 minutes away. Bill asks a great question. Bill E.O. Nair asked, but I thought Kyle Bass was advising him. Bill, it sounds like Trump ignored Kyle Bass. Kyle Bass is very smart. Kyle Bass was advising him. It sounds like Trump just straight up ignored him and went with his gut and did what would make Trump look best, which is the first president in U.S. history to cross the demilitarized zone into North Korea for a photo op, because I guess Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He's going for that, for his ego boost. So yes, Kyle Bass advising Trump, and my source, by the way, my China source for this was not Kyle Bass or anyone who works for him, but I am in contact with them. And so unfortunately, sounds like to me that Trump just, even though Kyle Bass is advising Trump for free for months now, that Trump just straight up ignored the advice. That would be my educated guess. Trump only takes his advice from Fox News people. more like the neocons. He's been listening to these neocons like Pompeo and Bolton and these other scumbags way too much. I mean, his defense before the guy got thrown out on the sexual harassment, not sexual harassment charges. The Patrick Shanahan guy, who was the defense secretary, I forget what the charges were. It was some problem. He had issues with his wife, domestic abuse or something like that. And that was a horrible pick because he put the fox in charge of the hen house. I mean, having a defense secretary who used to make lots of money selling more guns, more bullets, more tanks, more weapons of killing is not a good deal. Is not smart at all. So we'll see what happens over the next couple months, but if Trump has to get a deal, it's not going to be a good deal. He's going to claim it's going to be a good deal, but it's not going to be a good deal at all. Blake brings up, it's a shame and a wasted opportunity to educate your subscribers when you mention sources which obviously only favor China and socialism, even when Little Rocket Man changed his attitude. Actually, a lot of my sources don't like China. So Blake, you must be new to my channel or you're not paying attention. So I criticize all governments. I criticize the US government routinely. I criticize the Japanese government. I criticize the European Union. And I criticize China a lot. In fact, a lot of people won't criticize China. I criticize China all the time. There's tons of videos and analysis just going back over the last 5 or 6 months of good analysis of problems in China that hardly anyone is talking about. Kyle Bass is one of the few. And also China Uncensored on YouTube and ADV China. But in general, a lot of people don't criticize China. So Blake, I disagree with you. I don't think you know what you're talking about, and I'm pretty sure you're not familiar with my work. Well, another troll. Bye-bye. Hey, if you're gonna specifically log on to a live chat to insult me and call me names, you're gone, dude. Immediately. I'm pretty sure I know who this is. So, probably the same person I've been blocking now a couple times a week, who creates different screen names. Yeah, so the Ron Paul Institute Conference is in Northern Virginia. It's at the Dulles Airport Marriott, Saturday, August 24th, all day, basically 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. And that is, if you're not familiar with the area, that's about, without traffic, it's about 25-30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. So if you're in town, let me know. Send me an email. You decide to come. David Stockman is the keynote speaker as of now. They have not announced the rest of the speakers, but I'm expecting it to be a good list of speakers and guests. And you're going to get to see Ron Paul speak for 30 or 40 minutes, which is always good. And they've had really good guests in the past. Luminary Wind says we need libertarian government. I agree, but unfortunately, it looks like all governments, the size of them is increasing. Their power is increasing. They're in bed with, banks and the big technology, social media companies, and now in the U.S., since World War II, the military-industrial complex. President Trump is a well-known master chess player. Well, yeah, he's definitely showing weakness here. He's definitely showing weakness here, but I don't know what his next move is other than increasing tariffs. And again, I'm not in favor of tariffs, but I think that's in probabilities. I think that's likely what he will do. No, Rand Paul's not really electable for president. Rand is a good senator, but I don't think Thomas Massey is a great congressman too. And so I like Justin Amash. I don't think any of those guys are electable as president. Electability as president, you normally have to be, if you're a man, you have to be tall and you have to promise people a lot of free stuff. And, being brutally honest with people, that normally doesn't get the job done. And Trump was, when he was candidate Trump, he was, I would say, more brutally honest than other people. Because remember, he was calling the stock market a big, fat, ugly bubble before he became president. And he was criticizing the Federal Reserve too. And then that's basically ended after he became president. Although now he's criticizing the Federal Reserve again because the Fed won't give him tons of QE right away and won't cut rates as fast as he wants. Okay, well, we've been doing this for 31 minutes now. I think that's enough for today. And go ahead and fill out the questions and comments below the video on your thoughts on the trade war, if you think Trump has screwed things up and if you think China has an advantage, and what you think Trump has to do to try to regain the advantage. Okay, bye for now. Everyone have a great weekend.